Hello and welcome to the Marriage Preparation Course.
I want to add my welcome to Nikki's and say it's great you're doing this course, and we hope you really enjoy having 5 sessions together to focus on your relationship. We understand that engagement can be a frantic time, and organising a wedding can start to take up every waking moment.
I expect most of you have found that your wedding is costing a bit more than you'd thought, but probably not as much as the recent wedding of the 2 sons of an Indian billionaire. The 10,000 guests were flown in on 27 charter jets, and a fleet of 200 limousines took them to the venue.
They dined on a lavish banquet, which included Italian, Chinese, Mexican, Lebanese, Mongolian and Indian food. The exact cost of the wedding is unknown, but was estimated to be around $75 million. We hope that that makes yours seem a lot more reasonable.
We also looked up the longest engagement in the Guinness Book of Records, which was between Octavio Gillen and Adriana Martinez. They got engaged in 1902 and finally took the plunge in Mexico City 67 years later. By then, they were both aged 82 and they probably thought they didn't have much to lose.
So, whether you're in your 20s or your 80s, whether you've been engaged for a short time or a long time, we hope that these 5 sessions will be a bit like an oasis for you both, to think about the journey of marriage that you're about to embark on.
Our experience is that marriage is the most exciting and the most challenging adventure that we can undertake. We've been married for 28 years. When we first got married, we were both students. Then I became a teacher while Scilla was still at art college. We've now got 4 children, a girl and 3 boys, aged 24, 22, 19 and 17. And our daughter has recently got married, so we've now got a new son-in-law as well.
So, we know something of what you're going through with all the organising. The whole thing's still very fresh in our minds. We've been doing this marriage preparation course since 1985, and we absolutely love running it. What we've discovered from talking to a lot of married couples and from our own experience is that strong marriages don't develop automatically.
We hope that over this course you'll discover the attitudes and values, the tools and habits needed to build a healthy marriage that lasts a lifetime.
If you start building good patterns in your relationship today, you'll be reaping the effects of those choices in 5, 10, 20 years' time.
We asked reporter Brenda Amanis to take a look at why marriage preparation is so important in today's society.
Everything you could possibly need for your big day, from chocolate fountains to Diamante tiaras. Did you know that in the last 6 years, the cost of the average wedding in the UK has increased by 50%? Looking at all the things that you have to make decisions on, from your cakes, your invitation, your dress, it's no surprise to realise that the average wedding takes 250 hours to organise. But how much planning do a bride and groom put into making sure that their marriage will last?
No, not at all. We haven't really seen the need to.
Yeah, we spent a day with the church thinking about what marriage meant to us and what we meant to each other, family values, that type of thing.
We did go and see the vicar.
Yeah, I did speak to the vicar about it, that's for sure.
He sort of gave us the what to do and what not to do type of thing.
I think it just took us outside of all the arranging for the marriage itself and made us think about what we were actually doing, being together.
In the UK, 40% of first-time marriages break down. That means for every 3 couples, 1 will end in divorce. A sobering thought, but not one that these couples will be thinking about.
If you want to learn to play a musical instrument, you take lessons. You want to learn to drive, then you take lessons. Sadly, when it comes to marriage, we do so little at learning how to create a healthy marriage and make it last.
Well, we got married about 9 years ago, and before we got married, we were handed a form we had to fill in great detail about our finances and what we'd expect to spend on things. And answering simple questions like, what do you expect to pay for a family birthday present, meant we were able to have conversations we might never have had and really helped us prepare for married life together.
Yes. It was a very positive time to spend some time together doing marriage preparation. But since then, obviously, during 9 years, things have come up that have, at times, knocked us sideways. And we've had to deal with those things and sit down and talk and work through them together. And we've recently done a course that has been fantastic because it's made us talk about things that we wouldn't think to talk about or not necessarily want to talk about. And we've had to work through things together, and it's been very beneficial for us.
I guess we remain lifelong learners. We've never arrived in this kind of thing. We're always learning.
And so, if a couple wants to ensure their marriage, not just the wedding day, it seems the answer is to keep investing in their relationship.
Good marriages generally don't just happen. They take time and effort, and that doesn't mean it's hard work, but it just means that you have to keep trying at it. You must prioritise your relationship. It's all about having a positive attitude, which allows you to communicate really well. And if you do that, if you choose us as a priority, if you take time for us, and if you think in terms of the longer term, if you talk about your future and you always see arguments are smaller than the marriage, that's what makes a great marriage. Dedication.
We're going to be looking at what dedication means in practice. This course is very practical. Over the 5 sessions, Nikki and I will talk about different issues and then get you as a couple to discuss them.
Amongst other things, we'll be talking about how to communicate effectively,
How to resolve conflict,
how to meet each other's emotional needs,
how to build a friendship,
how to develop our sexual relationship,
and how to decide who does what. For example, who takes on the different roles.
One of the benefits of this course will be discovering whether you're coming into marriage with different expectations.
These might be the result of your upbringing. Sometimes it's only when we get married that we realise some of our deeply held assumptions about life are not universally shared.
We'll give you 2 very trivial examples from our own marriage. It took us several years to realise where these different expectations came from.
The first difference is to do with the car. When we got married, I expected that Nikki would want to keep the car filled up with fuel. I suppose that's because my father hardly ever lets the fuel gauge in their car go below halfway.
My father, on the other hand, would only fill up if he really had to. I think he thought it was a waste of time and was quite prepared to take the risk of running out. I do also remember him explaining to me that it's cheaper to run a car on the second half of the tank, as then the car's lighter. So I find I'm quite happy driving around with the warning light indicating we're nearly empty. Anyway, I think it makes the journey a bit more exciting.
Well, it makes it more exciting for him, but it's a nightmare for me. The second difference is to do with this, cling film or food wrap. And the second is to do with this, kitchen paper.
I find it very difficult to come to terms with how much of these Scilla used, and actually still uses, because my mother never used them. She always regarded them as incredibly extravagant. And if she wanted to keep leftovers, she'd put them in a plastic container. And if she needed to wipe something up, she'd use a cloth that she could wash and use again. I think she has some cling film and kitchen paper at home, but a roll of either would certainly last her at least 5 years.
My mother, on the other hand, must have used several miles of both, and I suppose I take after her.
When we first got married, if we went into overdraft, I was convinced it was because Scilla had used too much cling film and kitchen paper.
We didn't realise for some time why these issues caused friction between us, until we reflected on the expectations we'd inherited from our upbringing.
Of course, there are likely to be much more serious differences to deal with, especially if you come from different cultures. And it's a great help to recognise and to discuss these.
Each session, we'll be hearing from a selection of other married couples, talking about their experiences. We've called these our sofa couples. If you've seen the film When Harry Met Sally, you'll understand where we got our inspiration for the sofa.
And we'll also have a studio interview with a married couple. And later on in this programme, we'll be hearing from Paul and Jules, who've been married for 2 years and who'll be talking about their own experience of married life. And we'll give you lots of opportunities as a couple during the sessions to discuss together what we've been talking about.
You'll also see we've recommended some books on relationships in the back of the manual, including our own The Marriage Book, which covers a lot more than we can fit into the course. If at any time during the course you get stuck and feel you'd want extra help, please ask your course leaders, who'll be happy to find someone that you can talk to.
We want to start the course by talking about communication, because this really is a vital aspect of any healthy relationship. We've travelled the country to find out what people believe about relationships. And this is what people in Wales said about the importance of communication.
Why is communication so important in marriage?
It gives a much better relationship.
If you don't communicate, you're not going to get on.
Makes you understand each other better and what vibes we're working on.
You need to communicate with the other half. You've got to let them know what you're doing, what's happening, otherwise you're going to be doing your own thing and there's no point in being together.
Well, if you don't communicate in a marriage, then there's nothing really. I mean, how do you know what the other one's feeling?
If you don't communicate, there's no relationship with it at the end of the day.
You have to communicate. It's the most important part of a marriage, I think.
Talk.
Talking. Talking.
Nowadays you've got mobile phones, you've got email, just keep in contact, keep telling each other what's going on, what you're doing, how you're feeling.
Make time for each other, I think.
Well, you've got to be prepared to listen to other people's point of view. Doesn't always work, but...
Doesn't always work, no.
You've got to give 100% effort.
You've got to talk about it.
Yeah. Do things together.
Yeah.
That's what you do.
And telling each other that you love each other on a regular basis helps as well.
What causes communication breakdown?
By not communicating.
Jealousy.
Secrecy.
Misunderstanding. Selfishness.
Jealousy is usually the breakdown to most relationships all over the world.
If you keep secrets from one another, there will be a breakdown eventually.
Yeah. But you've just got to work around these things.
So we can't take communication in marriage for granted. Communication involves both talking effectively and listening effectively. We have to learn and go on learning how to be good communicators.
And marriage is probably the best training ground, not least because it's the most challenging.
It's helpful to recognise at the outset that we're all different in the way we communicate. Our communication is affected by several factors. We want to look at three in particular: our personality, our background, and our circumstances.
Let's start with the first thing, our personality.
We're all very different. Some people are extroverts. They tend to think out loud. Other people are introverts. They like to organise their thoughts in their heads first before they speak.
If I'm going to say something, I usually think things through. So if I make a suggestion, it's usually actually pretty much decided in my head. I've been through several arguments and I have come to a conclusion, even if it's just about what to have for breakfast. Whereas Richard will throw out suggestions willy-nilly.
Well, I wouldn't say it's willy-nilly. I mean, this is where our difference is. The suggestions that I throw out will be suggestions
lateral.
that will be completely lateral suggestions. Maybe no, the suggestions that I would come up with, my brain works differently. Whereas Poof will speak very concretely about what she has already decided. I like to talk through my suggestions and bring them out into the open and discuss them. So we both have a very different approach, but I think we've really both learnt about each other that those approaches are just different ways of doing things, and we're starting to learn to tolerate each other, but it's taken time and it still takes us time to get used to it.
Well, Richard will often say, oh, let's have pancakes for breakfast, but won't have counted eggs. And I will only suggest pancakes if I know there's eggs, flour, bicarb and maple syrup in the fridge.
But when we get the pancakes, they're worth waiting for.
Another way that we're different is that some people are more logical. They work things out methodically, sometimes very slowly. Other people are more intuitive. They act on hunches and may jump to conclusions.
During the course, you'll find out quite a lot about Nikki and myself. You'll probably realise that I'm more of an intuitive extrovert, while Nikki is more of a logical introvert. And that's about as different as you can get. If I'm worried about something, I need to talk it out as soon as possible.
She often says something to me with great passion and conviction, and then changes her mind 5 minutes later. So I've discovered over the years that it's better not to react too quickly. Meanwhile, I need time and space to sort out an issue in my head first, on my own, and then tell Scilla what I think.
But for me, that's not a discussion, just his conclusion.
So, as you can see, before we've even started to express our own points of view, our ways of communicating are very different because of our personalities.
There was an example of that the other day when we were in the car and I was chatting to Nicky about a big party that my parents were planning and all the different relations who were coming. I wanted him to help me work out the dynamics of who should sit next to who and so on. And he seemed a little bit distracted. When I asked him what he was thinking about, he hesitated for a moment and then admitted with slight embarrassment that he'd been trying to work out in his head how much it was going to cost to get up to Scotland for the party and whether it was cheaper to drive or go on the train.
Well, in the end, we didn't do either, actually. We found a cheap flight. OK, time for your first discussion. We've told you about ourselves, but how do you differ in the way that you communicate? Please turn in your manuals to the first exercise in session 1, and it's called How We Communicate. And we'd like you to take a few minutes to tell your fiancé how you think their personality affects the way that they communicate. And we're going to give you 5 minutes. The second thing that affects our communication is our family background. That will be different for every couple, and it's well worth trying to recognise what the differences are. Once we recognise them, then we can learn to work with them.
In terms of communication in our families, we've taken a lot of what we do now from our background. So Jason's grown up in a family where there are many, many men. So apart from his mum and his one sister, he's got like 4 brothers. And I guess in their family, they don't like to talk things through as much, so they might like to do activities and might like to play table tennis and so on. Whereas in my family, it's more female-dominated, and so we like to talk, because talking is a good thing, as BT will tell you. And again, we've had to learn to talk more, but also have times when we can just do stuff and not necessarily have to be speaking.
That's true. I guess my family is more spontaneous. We're not planners, which is the way now I approach things. I don't tend to plan things as closely as Amy does. And yeah, we generally don't talk things through. Things just tend to happen in our family, and you know, and then it's news to all of us, and that's kind of how we've always lived, and that's kind of how we are when we get together. Whereas it's very different at Amy's family. With Amy's family, that they tend to talk things through and discuss things months in advance.
No two families are the same. Some families air their differences immediately. Others delay or avoid talking about their differences at all.
Some families are quiet. Other families are much louder.
Some are more volatile. Others are calmer.
Some take it in turns to talk. Others frequently interrupt.
Nicky and my families, in contrast to our personalities, are very similar in many respects. But their styles of communication are very different. My family was definitely of the loud variety.
Well, mine was rather quieter. And at mealtimes, that difference was very obvious. I remember vividly the first time I met Scilla's family. I went to stay with them, and I arrived just as they were sitting down to eat.
My family tend to talk at the top of their voices all at once, while eating at great speed. Nicky, on the other hand, listened intently to everyone, always put his knife and fork down while he talked, and never talked with his mouth full.
Well, as I was the new boyfriend, her family were asking me loads of questions. So by the time they'd all finished, I was only on my second mouthful.
Then, after we sat and waited for him to finish, my mother offered him a second helping. I think Nicky wanted to make a good impression and to show that he liked my mother's cooking, so he accepted, at which point I inwardly groaned.
Another difference between many couples is that in some families, where they take it in turns to talk, interrupting is seen as rude. Whereas in another family, interrupting is a sign of interest, and not to interrupt is seen as boring or being unconcerned.
We're going to give you a chance now to think about the way your own family communicated as you were growing up. Then you'll be able to look at whether this is different to your fiancé's experience.
We want you to turn in your manuals now to the next exercise that's called Family Styles of Communication. First, mark with an X where you think your own family comes on the lines between the two extremes. Each of you do this on your own and then discuss with your fiancé what you've each put. And we're going to give you 10 minutes to do this. The third thing that will affect our communication is our circumstances. For example, our jobs. Our working patterns may well be very different from one another. One of you may be a nurse doing shift work, marrying someone with more regular working hours. Or you may have to travel a lot, or you may be going through a stressful period, such as changing jobs or moving house. In these circumstances, finding time when you're both relaxed and feel like communicating can be quite a challenge.
Yeah, we've come across particular circumstances that have made communication difficult, and I think the thing that's happening even still now is just the fact we've been moving house for such a long time. It's been, I don't know, 18 months or something we've been trying to move house for, and it just dominates our conversation. It can do, and we found it's actually good to just not talk about it and to put it to one side. But that can also be frustrating because then you're not communicating about the thing that you're feeling really upset about or, you know, is draining you. So that's been quite hard,
Yeah, and
it?
I find that I'm a sort of person that Heather's very good at drawing me out to talk about what is really going on, what am I really feeling about it, because my tendency will just be to avoid it. And yet there'll be lots going on under the surface which is affecting us, and you know, we're getting tired or grouchy with each other. So about the flat move, for example, it's like, you know, Heather's very helpful at drawing me out and saying, how are you really feeling about it at the moment? What's really going on for you? And that's been helpful. But it's not something I'll naturally do.
Our communication will also be affected by children if and when we have them. They alter our lives radically. The effect of broken nights, tiredness, and not having so much time together can stop us having any proper conversations.
The circumstances that put pressure on us may come from outside our relationship, such as unemployment, financial struggles, bereavement.
Or we may face pressure from circumstances within our marriage, such as miscarriage, the inability to have children, or a major illness.
I think one of the most difficult circumstances in our marriage has been when about 20 years ago I had a breakdown, and the communication there had just broken. That was it, you know, we weren't communicating at all. And after being in a hospital for a few weeks, you realise you had to start talking to me, and we suddenly got communicating with each other and talking about lots of different issues over a period of time. And
it was quite interesting because before it all happened, I thought everything was okay, and then when Christine had a breakdown and she came out of hospital, we realised, and we just used to walk for miles and miles and talk and talk. Well, Christine used to talk and talk most of the time, and we just used to walk everywhere, didn't we, for hours on end. And it was just nice, actually, also being able to spend the time together.
we just learnt a lot about each other and what we were really thinking.
When we're under pressure for whatever reason, most of us revert to the behaviour we learned when we were growing up. That could be shutting down, getting irritable or really heated, hiding emotionally, or going on the attack.
So, as we can see, these different dimensions of personality, background and circumstances all contribute to the way that we communicate with one another. Sometimes these will be positive and will actually help our communication, but other things will be negative and they will act like barriers to effective communication.
Would it be too impolite for me to ask for an earlier date?
Shh. We want to look now at 4 common barriers and how we can get round these. The first is insufficient time.
We have to set aside time for meaningful conversation on a regular basis, time that works and is good for both of us. That is perhaps the best investment we can make for our relationship.
And we have to plan this sort of time into our lives. It doesn't just happen. Planned time together prevents a backlog of non-communication or miscommunication.
We're going to be talking in the next session about how to make sure we plan sufficient time for effective communication between us.
There are some moments, however, that can't be planned, when we have to drop everything and listen to our partner.
Failing to make time to talk together is the first barrier to good communication.
The second barrier is failing to talk about our feelings.
There's a danger in marriage of communicating only about the practical things or talking only at the most superficial level. Oh no, it's raining again, or the trains seem to get less and less reliable, or would you like me to go to the shops or shall we go together?
Being open with each other and sharing our innermost thoughts is essential if we're to build a strong marriage.
I definitely found it difficult to express my feelings, especially early on in marriage. I realised that my parents have not been a good sort of example of it. They don't express their feelings very well. And it took me a while to actually even understand what I was feeling and then to have the time and the opportunity to talk to Jules about it. And I suppose what we've done, and Jules has been brilliant in asking me questions to enable me to speak about my feelings, and I've had to sort of be bold and brave to actually say, this is what I feel, Jules. Yeah. And so we're learning, but I think I'm getting a lot better.
There are a number of different reasons why we may find it difficult to communicate at the level of our feelings. Perhaps we feel inadequate and think to ourselves, if you knew what I was really like, you might not like me.
Or we feel vulnerable and think, if I told you my real feelings, I'm afraid you might laugh at me or reject me. Or we're fearful and think, if I told you why I'm worried or why I feel hurt, you'd get angry.
In the marriage book, we tell the story of James and Anna, who rescued their marriage from the brink of divorce. The main reason they gave for their problems was ineffective communication. This is what James wrote to us. Effective communication must mean revealing all parts of our lives. In my case, the parts which I'm well practiced at keeping hidden. For me, at least, it requires more than time. It requires courage.
If you're like James and find talking about your feelings difficult, we want to encourage you to dare to trust your fiancé and to start disclosing your feelings to him or her. We'll only do that, even to our husband or wife, if we feel accepted. So, if you know that your partner struggles to express their feelings, be sure to listen to them without judging or criticising, because it may well have taken great courage for them to disclose personal things.
We want to introduce you now to Paul and Jules. They met as students when they were both in the college boat club, but admit they haven't been in a boat together since they got married.
Well, Paul and Jules, welcome. It's great to see you. Thank you so much for coming. Now, tell us, first of all, are there big differences in the way in which you communicate?
I think the definite answer to that is yes. I'm a talker, and Julia, whether through choice or necessity, is a listener.
But that's not something that's necessarily the case all the time. I talk a lot to my friends, and in big groups I'm quite a talkative person, but just the dynamic between us tends to be more that Paul is talking and I'm listening.
Yeah. And do you think that your family backgrounds have affected the way that you communicate?
Yeah, I'd say definitely. My family is very quiet, quite placid, very relaxed, and they take things very gently. And if we're having a discussion around the table, everyone will take their turn, pause, think about what people have said. It's all very sedate. Whereas the first time I met Paul's family, I sat around the table for dinner with them and I just couldn't get a word in edgeways. I found it quite scary because they really go for their conversations. They get very passionate and very fired up. So we're quite different in that sense.
And are those differences exaggerated by your personality, would you say, Paul?
I think so. I mean, you take your personality from your family to a large extent, I think. So I used to get very frustrated with Julia when we were trying to have a conversation, and I would ask her a direct question, and there'd be a huge long pause afterwards, which I used to think she was doing deliberately. In my family, you're lucky to get to the end of your question before they just jump in there. So.
Yeah. So what have you had to learn to communicate effectively, do you think?
I think I've had to learn that so that Paul doesn't get frustrated with me and so that we have a very balanced conversation, that it's important for me to be able to articulate my feelings a little bit quicker, to express them and to put them in the conversation when they occur. And I think you've had to learn to listen a bit more, haven't you?
Yeah, that's been very challenging for me because I get very excited when we're having a debate anyway, but if nothing's coming back, I get even more, well, agitated, really. So it has been very challenging, but I've had to really learn just to shut up and listen. I mean, I really have to bite my lip sometimes. It's not so bad now, but at the start it was a big challenge.
Right.
Now, have you found that there are really good times for communicating, or sort of times that you have to avoid for communicating?
The definite times to avoid.
Yeah, I think we're very open and honest with each other. We don't have any sort of problems talking through things, but for some reason I can get very comfortable just with talking about things as we're going to sleep. I'm very sort of laid back, I'm very happy, I feel very much in love, very secure, and I suddenly say, just as we're about to drop off to sleep, "Oh, Paul, what do you think about this?" And he goes, "Oh, not now." So bad time to discuss things.
Two sides to every coin, though, because I usually end up having a big debate when we're driving, and when Julia's trying to navigate us through central London, I'm kind of dealing with major issues. So.
And I'm trying to read the map at the same time. So I think it's good to just have a set-aside time.
So those are bad times, and what are the sort of times you set aside? What are the good times?
I think when we come home in the evening, it's really nice to spend some time together where we can just like focus on each other and put the day aside and see what we've both been up to. And before we have our dinner or over dinner, that's a nice time for us.
Yeah, over a meal, that's good.
Now, if there was one tip you would want to pass on to the engaged couples, what would that be?
I think that if one thing that I was thinking about when we were engaged was that when you get married, you become almost like one person. If you think you become like a united front, then if that one person is going to be almost created between you, then it's a good idea to put the best parts of yourself into the half of that person that you're creating, and not to put the cantankerous or argumentative sides of yourself into that person. I think that's a good idea.
And Jules, what about you?
Somebody gave us this piece of advice before we got married, and we found it very important, is never to let the sun go down on your wrath, and just always to put things aside and not to let them drag on or cause any problems. And so there's never any tarnishing on our relationship. We always start and finish every day very much in love, and not with any sort of bad feeling between us.
Well, Paul and Jules, thank you so much for joining us and for passing on all that wisdom.
We want you to turn to the next exercise in your manual called Effective Talking. We're going to give you an opportunity to ask your fiancé how difficult or easy it is for them to talk about their inner thoughts, attitudes and emotions. Find out if they were encouraged to talk about their feelings during their upbringing. And we're going to give you 10 minutes to do this.
We want to go on now to look at a third barrier to effective communication, which is holding on to hurt and resentment. Resentment is a negative emotion which can be stored up and left to fester for hours, days, or even over years. And if this becomes a habit, it can lead to a complete breakdown in communication.
When we first got married, my way of dealing with being misunderstood or hurt was to shout at Nikki and then go into a sulk. And I can tell you they were quite bad sulks. It wasn't very nice for Nikki, and our communication really suffered. My mood affected everything.
Sometimes Scylla's mood would last for a day, sometimes for 48 hours, or even longer. And there was nothing I could do to make things better.
I learned that I had to deal with this way of behaving, and instead of secretly sulking, I realised I had to be open with Nikki and tell him why I was feeling so resentful.
Knowing why Scylla was upset really helped me. We could then discuss the issue, and I could apologise if I'd hurt her without realising it.
Once I knew that Nikki would listen and try to understand why I was feeling upset, I found that my resentment went away and I didn't need to sulk anymore. And this made a big difference. We're going to be looking more at the importance of talking about hurt and the whole process of forgiveness in session 3.
But now we want to move on and look at the fourth and final barrier to effective communication, which is failing to listen to each other. Listening is of huge importance, as we heard from Paul and Jules earlier, not only if we're to communicate effectively, but also in building a foundation of understanding and intimacy in our marriage.
A relationship counsellor, Gerard Hughes, said this: "The gift of being a good listener, a gift which requires constant practice, is perhaps the most healing gift anyone can possess. It doesn't judge or advise the other, but communicates support at a level deeper than words."
Just think for a moment what it feels like when you're listened to. For me, I feel valued, understood, loved, supported.
Now think, what does it feel like when you're not listened to? It makes me feel frustrated, ignored, taken for granted, or even rejected.
Not being listened to is highly damaging to a relationship. But equally, being a good listener is very difficult because it's costly. It demands our time and our patience. Stephen Covey, author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, once said, "This means not just listening with your ears, but also, more importantly, listening with your eyes and your heart, listening for feeling, for meaning."
Most of us have some bad listening habits to overcome, such as interrupting our partner when they're in full flow, or maybe going off at a tangent with a story of our own, or giving advice instead of empathy. As someone who is not naturally a good listener, I am quite likely to do all 3, and probably some others as well. But I don't think I'm the only one to do more talking than listening.
I have quite a few bad habits in communicating. I think probably my classic worst one is trying to say something important whilst being in a completely different room, or washing up, or cooking. And I realised early on in marriage that if something was worth saying, it was worth stopping, sitting down, and speaking properly to Eric. My other classic bad habit is interrupting. I get a little over-enthusiastic and start putting words in Eric's mouth. So that's mine.
I think my bad habits are just that it's just really listening, actually. Being able to listen to what Jules is trying to say and not trying to problem solve. You know, I'll solve the problem straight away rather than letting Jules just say what she's feeling. I'll get in there, sort it out, and it'll be over. Don't worry about it.
Whatever our bad habits, they will have a negative impact on our relationship.
But the good news is, effective listening is something we can all learn and practice. It means putting aside our own agenda and seeing the world through our fiancé's eyes and making the effort to understand them when they think or feel differently to us. Even the worst listeners among us can change.
I'm a terrible listener. I give advice, I interrupt, I have patience for about 14 seconds. But I actually learned how to listen to Deb. I just listen, I don't say anything, don't give her any advice, and she works it all out for herself. It's amazing.
And I think the big thing is that we do tell each other when we want the other one to listen to us. Because, you know, you're busy all the time, you're rushing around, and so sometimes I just say, Miles, I just want you to sit down and I want you to listen to me, and you do, and it really works.
Yep. And you listen to me very well, fantastically. You have to, a lot, yes.
In a moment, we're going to get you to practice listening to each other. But first, Nikki and I are going to have a conversation in front of you to try to demonstrate what effective listening looks like and sounds like.
I'm going to tell Scilla something that's bothering me. And we're going to use a technique that will help to show me she's listening, seeking to understand me and to empathise with me. Of course, that can be hard for any of us to do if I'm telling her something about her own behaviour. We all desperately want to justify ourselves rather than try to see it from our partner's point of view. And we don't learn this kind of listening overnight. It takes a lot of practice.
I have absolutely no idea what Nikki's going to talk to me about. This is not rehearsed. When he's told me, I'm going to try to reflect back what he said. That is, repeat back to him what he's told me, particularly any feelings that he's expressed. If I haven't understood properly, he'll tell me again. Then I'm going to ask him, what's concerning you most about what you've just told me? Then I'll listen and repeat back to him again. Then I'm going to ask him, is there anything that you could do, or if it's appropriate, you'd like me or us to do about what you've just said? Then I'll listen and reflect back again. And finally, I'm going to ask him, is there anything else that you'd like to say? So, Nikki, what's the issue that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I wanted to talk about times when we're driving in the car. Actually, more specifically, when I'm driving. And I suppose over the years we've probably had our most futile arguments in the car. And I know that there are times when I don't know the way and I have to ask you for directions, and that's great. But there are other times when I think I do know the way, and when you sort of tell me that you think your way is better, I feel, well, I sort of feel rather undermined and actually upset. I mean, I don't think I express it really very much, but actually it makes me feel you don't trust the way that I want to go. And I think over the years, actually, when we've had people in the car, when our children were younger, when they were with us, I felt rather undermined by your never sort of trusting that my way might perhaps be better.
OK, so the issue is about when we're in the car and when we're going somewhere in the car, and you think that over the years we've probably had some of our most futile arguments in the car, and it's usually about the sort of me giving you directions. Obviously, sometimes you don't know the way and you need me to give you directions, but sometimes you know the way and you don't want me telling you how to go. And it's when I give you those directions, when you do actually know the way, that it makes you feel kind of quite undermined. It's as if I don't trust you. Yeah. And particularly when there are other people in the car, like when, you know, our children were younger and it was in front of them and I'd be going on and you felt particularly undermined and, yeah, what was the other thing you said? Undermined and... Well, and upset. I don't think I don't express usually when I'm upset, but it does upset me that, you know, you don't trust that I might know the best way to go. So it's the upset, you get upset. Yeah. Really, it's that I might not trust you knowing the right way to go. And out of all of that, what's concerning you most about what you've said, really? What's at the heart of it? I think it's that I feel you don't give me credit for the fact I might sometimes know a better way. So that I think what's most important is that, you know, you don't sort of allow me sometimes to go the way that I want to go. Or if I do go the way I want to go, that you attack me. So you feel that I don't give you credit for knowing the way that we're going. And even if I do, or sort of if I tell you which way to go, you just feel that I'm attacking you. Is that right? Yeah, I think just that. And so what do you think that you could do about this situation? Or perhaps it's more like, what could I do about this situation? Well, I was thinking about it, and I wonder if we could have an agreement that whoever of us is driving is the final arbiter, makes the final decision. And certainly, I'm sure I will ask you for advice as to which way to go. But when I'm driving, I'd love to have the final decision. And when you're driving, then you have the final decision. OK, so you feel it'd be really good if we made a kind of agreement that whoever's driving has the final decision about which way we're going. So if you're driving, you can make the final decision and go your way, and if I'm driving, then I can do the same. Yeah. OK. That's it. So is there anything else that you want to say? Well, I suppose I do feel it's a bit silly waiting 28 years to talk to you about this. But probably, well, we could work on it for the coming years. Anyway, that's all right. OK, so you think it's a pity we waited 28 years to talk about it like this and for you to tell me what you feel about it, but we can work on it from now on. Yeah, exactly. OK, fine. Well, I love doing this exercise because I know that Scylla's going to have to listen to me. But don't worry. I will give Scylla a chance to have her say later. Now it's your turn, and you'll see the instructions in your manual for the exercise that's called effective listening.
And what we want you to do is to take this time to listen to each other about something that's clearly important for your fiancé, but it may not be for you. And this is a good opportunity to practice expressing your feelings if you're not used to doing so.
It could be to do with the arrangements for your wedding or something else that you're worried about. And we're going to give you 15 minutes. Make sure you both have an opportunity to talk and to listen.
You'll see that we put some homework in the manual after each session. But don't worry, it's not the sort that's taken in and marked. It's designed to help you to follow up the topic of each session.
And we'll finish each session by hearing one of the passages suggested in the back of the manual as a possible reading for your marriage service. This session, we're going to hear Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 to 17.
Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, you were called to peace, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and as you sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him.
Finally, I'd like to close this session with a short prayer. Lord, thank you that you're the God of love. We thank you that you're always listening to us. Please help us to put on love and to be good at listening to each other. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
That's all for this session, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.